The sound that broke me was not the kiss. It was the quiet click of the refrigerator door closing, gentle as a secret, as if the house itself were trying to keep what it had just shown me. I had come downstairs for ice. That is the lie I tell when people ask why I was in the kitchen so late on Christmas Eve. The truth is uglier. I came down because sleep would not come, because the house felt too full of other people's joy, because I had spent the entire evening smiling until my cheeks hurt while pretending not to notice how my husband barely looked at me and how my sister never let him out of her sight. It was just past midnight. The digital clock on the microwave glowed soft blue numbers I did not read because my eyes were already adjusting to something far worse. The kitchen light was off. Only the tree in the living room spilled a pale gold glow through the doorway. Ornaments reflected tiny versions of myself, fractured and thin. I heard breathing first. Not heavy, not rushed, comfortable, intimate, the kind that belongs to two people who know exactly where the other one will be. I stopped. I told myself it was nothing. My sister Caroline had always lingered in kitchens, nursing wine, talking too loud, making herself the center of every room. My husband Mark had always been polite to a fault, especially around my family. I took one more step. Then I saw them. They stood close, framed by the counter, and the island their bodies angled in a way that erased any innocent explanation. Caroline's hand was on Mark's chest, fingers spread like she belonged there. His head was tilted down toward hers, familiar practiced. When they kissed, it was not hurried or guilty. It was slow, almost tender. My mind did something strange then. It reached backward, pulling up moments I had stored away without examining. The way Caroline had insisted on helping Mark carry boxes when we moved, the way she laughed too loudly at his jokes, the way Mark always seemed tense when she visited as if bracing for something he would not name. I made a sound. I do not remember deciding to. It escaped me small and sharp. They broke apart instantly. Mark's face drained of color. Caroline's eyes widened, then narrowed, then softened into something like pity. That look hurt more than the kiss. Evelyn, Mark said. My name sounded foreign in his mouth. I did not scream. I did not throw anything. I did not ask the question everyone expects. How long? Why? How could you? None of it came. What came instead was a strange calm, the kind that settles in right before a storm. I looked at my sister. She was 3 years older than me, always had been, always would be. Growing up, she was the one teachers adored, the one my parents bragged about, the one whose mistakes were explained away as stress or passion. I was the quiet one. The reliable one, the one who learned early that being needed was safer than being loved. What is this? I asked. Caroline exhaled slowly like someone tired of pretending. I didn't want you to find out like this. Mark stepped toward me. Eve, please, let me explain. I held up my hand. He stopped. That was new. Behind them, the counter was still set from earlier. Empty wine glasses, a plate of cookies my mother had insisted Caroline help me bake, though she barely touched the dough. A red ribbon lay discarded near the sink, curling in on itself. This is my house, I said. My voice sounded steady even to me. On Christmas, Caroline tilted her head. We didn't plan it for tonight. Something in me snapped, then not loudly, but cleanly like a bone breaking without pain. I realized with a clarity that took my breath away that this was not an accident. This was not a moment of weakness. This was a choice that had been rehearsed in 100 small ways, while I was busy being grateful for scraps of affection. How long, I asked. Mark opened his mouth. Caroline answered first. Since the fall. The fall. Thanksgiving dinner. She had sat across from me at my own table, passing gravy, asking about my work, touching my husband's arm as if by mistake. I remembered the way my mother had watched them, both eyes bright with approval, as if seeing something she recognized. I nodded. Once, I did not trust myself to do more. Get out, I said to Caroline. She blinked. It's late. Get out. Mark turned to her. I'll handle this. That word, handle, as if I were a problem to manage. No, I said, you won't. Caroline hesitated, then shrugged the same way she had always done when consequences approached. We'll talk later, she said, already reaching for her coat. She brushed past me, her perfume lingering expensive and familiar. The front door closed softly behind her. Silence rushed in. Mark stood there, hands dangling uselessly at his sides. I love you, he said too quickly. This was a mistake. I looked at him, then really looked, and saw not the man I married, but a stranger who had been wearing his face for years. Go sleep in the guest room, I said. We'll talk after Christmas. He searched my face for something: anger, maybe hysteria, permission to minimize what he had done. He found none of it. Finally, he nodded and walked away. I stood alone in the kitchen long after, staring at the darkened window, my reflection faint and doubled. Outside, snow fell quietly, covering everything, pretending purity could be restored by a thin white layer. Upstairs, the house creaked as if settling into a new shape. I did not cry, not yet. Instead, I thought of my parents already asleep across town, who had always told me family came first, who had never noticed how often that rule applied only to me. I thought of the will my father liked to joke about, the company he planned to leave to Caroline someday, the way my contributions were always described as supportive, never essential. I thought of all the times I had been excluded and told myself it was coincidence. By the time the sun began to rise, I understood something with terrifying certainty. This was not just a betrayal of marriage. It was a family drama decades in the making. And Christmas was only the beginning. Morning arrived without permission. I had not slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan as it cut slow circles through the dark, counting each rotation the way I used to count seconds during childhood punishments, waiting for something to end. When light finally crept through the curtains, pale and unforgiving, it felt less like dawn and more like exposure. Mark did not come into the bedroom. That was deliberate. He knew me well enough to understand that space was safer than apologies right now. Or maybe he knew I would not give him the reaction he wanted. Either way, the silence between us grew thick, layered with everything unsaid. Downstairs, the house looked exactly as it had the night before. That detail unsettled me more than chaos would have. The Christmas tree still glowed, obedient to its timer. Wrapped gifts remained neatly stacked, my careful handwriting looping across name tags that now felt mocking. The smell of pine and cinnamon lingered warm and domestic, as if the walls themselves were conspiring to gaslight me. I poured coffee I did not want and took one careful sip, more for the ritual than the taste. My hands did not shake. That worried me. Shock, I realized, is a kind of stillness, a pause before impact. Mark appeared in the doorway, already dressed, hair damp, jaw tight. He looked like a man preparing for court, not confession. "Eve," he said softly, "can we talk?" I nodded toward the chair across from me. "Sit." He did. His knee bounced, a nervous habit I had always found endearing. Now it irritated me like a lie told too many times. "I never meant to hurt you," he began. I held up a finger. "Don't start with intent, start with truth." He swallowed. It happened gradually. "Everything does," I said. "That doesn't make it accidental." He exhaled. "Caroline and I, it started as conversations. She understood me. She listened." The words landed with dull thuds. Understood, listened. As if I had not spent years adjusting my life around his moods, his career, his silences. "And I asked. "That's not what I'm saying." "It is exactly what you're saying," I replied. My voice remained calm, almost curious. "You just don't like how it sounds when I say it." He looked down at his hands. I was lonely. I almost laughed. Almost. Loneliness is a convenient costume for betrayal. It frames the betrayer as a victim of circumstance rather than a creator of damage. "When did you decide to tell me?" I asked. Mark hesitated. That pause was everything. "I didn't," he admitted. Something settled, then heavy and final. The idea that I would have gone on believing in a marriage that no longer existed, hosting dinners, smiling at my sister across holiday tables, made my stomach turn. "You were never going to tell me," I said. He looked up, eyes glassy. "I didn't want to lose you." "You already did," I replied. There was a knock at the front door. We both froze. The knock came again, sharp and familiar. 3 quick raps, confident. My mother. I felt a flicker of something close to hysteria, not because of the timing, but because of the symmetry. Of course she would arrive now, bearing pastries and unsolicited opinions, ready to curate the image of our family Christmas. "I'll get it," Mark said. "No," I said, "I will." My mother swept in like she owned the place, cheeks flushed from the cold perfume announcing her before her voice did. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart." Her eyes darted past me, already scanning for signs of disorder. "Where's Caroline?" she asked casually. I watched her carefully. There was no concern in her tone, only expectation. "She left early," I said. My mother frowned. "She never leaves early." Mark stood behind me, silent. The dynamic had already shifted. He was no longer the buffer. He was the evidence. "Mom," I said, "we need to talk." She stiffened. "Now." "Yes, now." She glanced at Mark, then back at me, irritation flashing across her face. "This better not be another one of your overreactions." That word. Overreaction. It had followed me my entire life, deployed whenever my feelings inconvenienced someone else. "Caroline and Mark are having an affair," I said. The sentence hung there plain and devastating. My mother's face went blank. Not shocked, not confused, blank. "That's ridiculous," she said finally. "You must have misunderstood." "I saw them," I replied, "in my kitchen." Her mouth tightened. "Caroline would never do that." Mark cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hayes, it's true." She turned on him, then eyes sharp. "I did not ask you." Something in me stirred. Anger, yes, but beneath it, recognition. This was not new. This was familiar. "You knew," I said slowly. "Didn't you?" She scoffed. "Don't be dramatic." "You knew something I pressed, or at least suspected." She avoided my eyes. That was all the answer I needed. "Family matters should be handled privately," she said. "This is Christmas. We can't let emotions ruin it." I laughed, then a short, brittle sound. "My marriage is over." She waved a hand. "Marriages recover. Sisters are forever." There it was, the hierarchy laid bare. "Get out," I said. She stared at me. "Excuse me." "You heard me." "This is my daughter's house, too," she snapped. "No," I said. "This is mine." Her face hardened. "You're making a mistake." I stepped aside and opened the door. Cold air rushed in sharp and bracing. "Leave," I said, "before I say things I can't take back." She hesitated, then grabbed her purse, dignity gathering itself like a cloak. "We'll talk when you calm down." She left. The door closed with a finality that echoed through my chest. Mark stood very still. "I can fix this," he said weakly. I turned to him. "You don't understand something yet," I said. "This isn't about fixing us." He frowned. "Then what is it about?" I met his gaze steady and unflinching. "It's about the truth," I said, "and what I'm going to do with it." Outside, church bells began to ring, calling people to forgiveness, to peace. I wrapped my hands around my cold coffee and smiled just a little. They had mistaken my silence for acceptance. They were about to learn the difference. By the afternoon of Christmas Day, the shock had burned off, leaving something sharper in its place. Clarity. Mark stayed out of my way. He hovered at the edges of the house like a ghost with a mortgage, answering emails that did not need answering, cleaning surfaces already clean. I let him. Watching him try to perform usefulness felt like watching a stranger rehearse a role he no longer understood. I went upstairs and closed the bedroom door behind me. The lock clicked softly, decisively. That sound grounded me. I sat on the edge of the bed and took a breath deep enough to hurt. I did not reach for my phone right away. That would have been instinct, not strategy. Instead, I opened the small wooden box in my dresser, the one Mark never touched, because it held things he considered sentimental clutter. Old notebooks, receipts, folded documents I had saved without knowing exactly why. Women like me are taught to call this hoarding. I call it memory. Near the bottom was a slim folder, cream-colored, unmarked. Inside were copies of papers I had signed years ago without ceremony during a period of my life when everything important was always presented as urgent, boring, and already decided. The company, Hayes Hospitality Group, my father's pride and legacy. The family business everyone assumed Caroline would inherit one day because she had the personality for leadership, because she was visible, because she was loud. What no one liked to talk about was that the expansion into boutique hotels had been my idea, that the financial modeling, the vendor negotiations, the branding strategy had all passed through my hands while Caroline traveled and networked and posted photos that made investors feel good. At the time, I had not minded. I was 30 years old, then newly married, convinced that contribution was enough even without recognition. I believed in shared success. I pulled out the papers and spread them on the bed. Operating agreements, profit distributions, silent partner clauses. My name was there, not as an afterthought, as a foundation. I felt a slow, dangerous smile stretch across my face. Downstairs, my phone buzzed. Once, twice, Caroline. I let it ring. Then a text. "We need to talk. This is getting out of hand." Out of hand. As if the situation had slipped accidentally, as if no one had been gripping it tightly for months. Another text followed. "I never meant to hurt you. Please don't do anything you'll regret." I imagined her typing that, lips pursed, convinced she was being generous. I put the phone face down and stood. My reflection in the mirror startled me. I looked older than I had 24 hours ago, but not weaker, sharper, as if grief had carved away excess. I went back downstairs and found Mark sitting at the dining table, papers spread out in front of him now. Our papers, mortgage statements, insurance, the practical debris of a life built together. "I called my attorney," he said quietly. I nodded. "So did I." "That got his attention. You did?" "Yes." "When?" "This morning." His brow furrowed. "Eve, we don't have to make this adversarial." I took a seat across from him. "You made it adversarial when you brought my sister into our marriage." He flinched. "I'm not interested in revenge," he said quickly. I studied him. You don't get to decide that. Silence stretched between us, dense and uncomfortable. What do you want? He asked finally. The question almost amused me. Want? As if this were still a negotiation between equals. I want honesty, I said. Complete honesty. No minimization, no protecting anyone. He nodded. Okay. When did Caroline know about the company documents? I asked. His eyes widened. What? When did she find out I wasn't just helping? I repeated. When did she learn I had legal standing? He hesitated. That hesitation is an answer, I said. She found out last year, he admitted. Your father mentioned it at dinner. A memory surfaced. My father, a little too much wine, gesturing toward me, saying something about how I was the smart one, how paperwork mattered. Caroline had laughed then. A brittle sound. And after that, I asked. Mark looked down. She asked questions. About me, I said. About the company, he corrected weakly. Don't insult me, I replied. Another pause, then quieter. She was worried you'd complicate things. I nodded, by existing. Yes, there it was again, the familiar role assigned to me. Obstacle, variable, problem. And you, I asked, did you ever tell her no? He did not answer. I stood. I need you to leave. His head snapped up. What? Pack a bag, I said. Stay somewhere else. This is my house too. Not tonight. And tomorrow. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He stood defeated and walked upstairs. As he moved, my phone buzzed again, this time a call. My father. I answered. Evelyn, he said, voice brisk. Your mother told me there's been a misunderstanding. I almost laughed. Is that what she called it? Family conflicts happen, he said. We don't need to involve outsiders. You mean lawyers, I replied, a sharp intake of breath. Now, why would you do that? Because I said I've spent my whole life being told to keep quiet for the good of the family, and it hasn't done any of you any good. Caroline is under a lot of pressure, he said. She didn't mean for things to go this far. And Mark, I asked, was he under pressure too? Silence. You're asking me to forgive her, I said, again. I'm asking you to be reasonable. Reasonable. Another word that meant compliant. I'm done being reasonable, I said. He sighed. You're going to regret this. I smiled, though he could not see it. No, I said, you are. I hung up. By evening, the house was quiet again. Mark left with a suitcase and a look I did not chase. The sky darkened early heavy with snow. I sat at the table alone, documents spread out like a map. For the first time, I saw the full picture. Not just betrayal of marriage, not just sister against sister. This was about inheritance, control, who was allowed to matter. They thought I would fold, cry, accept apologies in exchange for peace. They had forgotten something essential. I had built half of what they stood on, and I was done pretending I hadn't. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering tracks, erasing evidence. Inside, I began planning what I would reveal, and when. The first night alone felt quieter than grief usually does. No sobbing, no shaking. Just the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock in the hallway, the steady rhythm of my own breathing reminding me that I was still here, that I had survived the initial impact. What remained was not sadness. It was calculation. I slept for a few hours near dawn and woke with a clarity that surprised me. Grief fogs some people. It sharpens others. I had always suspected which one I would be. I made breakfast slowly, deliberately. Eggs, toast, coffee, familiar motions in a kitchen that had witnessed too much truth. Each movement steadied me. When I finished, I washed the pan immediately, a small act of control in a life that had slipped out of alignment. Then I opened my laptop. My attorney, Laura Whitman, had been recommended by a woman I trusted, a former colleague, who once described her as polite, thorough, and terrifying in court. Laura specialized in corporate disputes and marital asset protection, which told me everything I needed to know about how often those two things overlapped. I reread her email from the night before. I've reviewed the preliminary documents you sent. We need to talk. There are options. Options, plural. We spoke at 9 that morning. Laura's voice was calm, measured, unhurried. She asked questions that went straight to the bones of the situation. How long have you been married? 7 years. Any children? No. That simplifies things. It did, in ways that felt both merciful and devastating. She walked me through what I already suspected, but had never articulated. The company was not a sentimental family legacy. It was a legal entity with defined ownership. My contributions were not favors. They were capital, intellectual and financial. You are not as exposed as you think, she said. In fact, you're in a position of leverage. Leverage. Another word that changed meaning depending on who held it. What about my sister, I asked. There was a pause. What about her? She believes the company will be hers. Laura exhaled softly. Belief is not the same as entitlement. We discussed timing, disclosure, strategy, not revenge, Strategy. Laura did not speak in absolutes or emotions. She spoke in consequences. If you act too quickly, she warned you look reactive. If you wait, you look intentional. Intentional had always scared people more. After we hung up, I sat at the table and let the information settle. Outside, the neighborhood moved through its holiday rituals. Children in puffy coats, couples carrying leftover pies, laughter drifting through cold air. My phone buzzed again. "Caroline." This time I answered. "Eve," she said immediately, voice tight. "You didn't have to kick Mom out like that." "I didn't kick her out," I replied. "I asked her to leave my house." "You embarrassed her." "She embarrassed herself." A sharp breath on the other end. "You're being cruel." I smiled faintly. "That's interesting coming from you." She shifted tactics. "Look, I know you're hurt. Anyone would be. But blowing this up helps no one." "It helps me," I said. "You always do this," she snapped. "You take things too personally." I closed my eyes. That sentence had followed me my entire life, trailing behind every boundary I ever tried to set. "Caroline," I said quietly, "you slept with my husband." "That's not fair," she said immediately. "It wasn't just physical. We had a connection." There it was, the justification dressed up as romance. And now I asked, "What do you want?" She hesitated. "I want us to handle this as a family." "I am handling it as a family matter," I replied. "My family." "You're threatening everything," she said. "The company, Mom and Dad's health. Do you want to be responsible for that?" The manipulation was so familiar it almost bored me. "You should have thought of that before you crossed a line you couldn't uncross," I said. A pause, then colder. "You're not as important as you think you are." I laughed then. A real laugh this time. "That's where you're wrong." I ended the call. In the afternoon, I drove to my parents' house unannounced, not to confront them, to observe. I had learned that information gathered quietly was more valuable than anything extracted through force. Their house looked unchanged, immaculate, carefully curated, a place where problems were smoothed over before they could become visible. My father answered the door, surprise flickering across his face. "Evelyn." "I need a few things," I said. "Old records, from the company, early years." He stiffened. "Why?" "Because I worked on them," I replied, "and I don't have copies." He hesitated, then stepped aside. Control mattered to him. Denial mattered more. In his office, I moved slowly, respectfully pulling folders I recognized, leaving others untouched. He watched me the entire time, jaw tight. "You're making a mistake," he said again. "I've been making one my whole life," I replied. "I'm correcting it." He did not stop me. That night back home, I laid everything out across the dining table. Documents, timelines, text messages I had never deleted, patterns I had ignored. This was not just about betrayal between three people. It was about a system that had taught Caroline she was entitled and Mark he was invisible without admiration. A system that had taught me silence was virtue. I began drafting something new, not a confrontation, a sequence. If they wanted peace, they should have been honest. If they wanted control, they should not have underestimated me. By the time I closed my laptop, the plan was not complete, but it was forming, layer by layer, patient, unforgiving. Tomorrow I would take the first step, and they would not see it coming. The first step of revenge is rarely loud. It is quiet, administrative, almost boring to anyone not paying attention. The morning after my visit to my parents' house, I dressed carefully, not because I was seeing anyone important, but because I needed to feel composed inside my own skin. Soft sweater, dark jeans, boots sensible enough to walk through snow without slipping. I looked like a woman running errands, not one preparing to dismantle a narrative her family had spent decades protecting. I drove to the downtown office of Hayes Hospitality Group just after 10. The building was modest from the outside, all glass and steel, but I had helped choose the location years ago, close to transit, neutral enough to reassure conservative investors, modern enough to signal growth. Another quiet decision no one remembered was mine. The receptionist smiled when she saw me. "Merry Christmas week," she said. "Merry Christmas," I replied. She did not call ahead. She did not announce me. That told me everything I needed to know about how I was perceived here. Familiar, harmless, non-threatening. I took the elevator alone, watching the numbers climb. With each floor, my heartbeat slowed. On the 5th floor, I walked past offices I had once worked out of names on doors, belonging to people I had hired, trained, supported. Some nodded hello. Some looked surprised. None looked alarmed. Good. I went straight to the conference room and sat at the long table, placing my bag neatly at my feet. I did not open my laptop yet. I wanted to see who came in first. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, the door opened and Richard stepped in. He was the company's chief financial officer, a man who prided himself on neutrality. He stopped short when he saw me. Evelyn, he said carefully, I didn't know you were coming in today. I know, I replied. That was intentional. He took a seat across from me. Is everything all right? I met his eyes. I'm reviewing my position. He blinked. Your position? Yes. A pause. Should Caroline be here? No, I said. Not yet. That word landed. Yet. I opened my laptop, then sliding a document across the table toward him. I'd like updated financials. Full access. Today. Richard frowned slightly. I'd need authorization. I'm authorized, I said, calm as water. Check the operating agreement. He glanced down, then back up. He knew. Of course he knew. People like Richard always knew. They simply waited to see who would claim what belonged to them. I see, he said slowly. There may be questions. I'm sure there will be, I replied. We can address them as they arise. By the time I left the building an hour later, the wheels were in motion, quiet emails sent, permissions adjusted, notifications triggered, nothing dramatic, nothing Caroline would notice immediately. That afternoon my phone rang. Mark. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call, then a text. Please, we need to talk. Your father called me. He's worried. Of course he was. I did not respond. Instead, I drove to the small office park on the edge of town where my grandmother's lawyer still practiced. I had not seen him in years, but he remembered me the moment I walked in. You look just like her, he said softly. My grandmother had been the only one in my family who saw me clearly. She died when I was in my 20s, leaving behind stories no one bothered to ask about, and a will everyone assumed favored tradition over fairness. I need to review her estate documents, I said. His eyebrows lifted. Now. Yes. He nodded once. Sit. We spent 2 hours going over paperwork most people had forgotten existed. Trusts, contingencies, conditions tied to behavior, not birth order. Your grandmother was very specific, he said finally. She believed character revealed itself under pressure. I swallowed. Did she ever talk about Caroline? He hesitated. She worried about imbalance. I almost smiled. When I left his office, the sky had darkened clouds heavy with fresh snow. My phone buzzed again. A message from my mother this time. We are very concerned about you. This anger isn't like you. I typed a reply, then erased it, typed another, deleted that too. Concern had always arrived late in my family, only after compliance failed. That evening I cooked for myself and ate standing at the counter. I did not sit at the table where Mark and Caroline had leaned into each other like conspirators. Some spaces need time. I poured a glass of wine and opened my laptop again. Caroline had posted a photo on social media, her and Mark smiling too brightly at a charity event from months ago. The caption was vague, inspirational. Comments flooded in. Praise, admiration. People loved a polished illusion. I studied the image, noting the details others missed. His hand too familiar on her back, her head angled toward his shoulder, a story hidden in plain sight. I closed the app. Revenge is not about exposure first. It is about destabilization, about letting people feel the ground shift before they understand why. The next morning, the call I expected finally came. Caroline. What did you do? She demanded, skipping all pleasantries. I smiled into the phone. Good morning to you too. Richard won't return my emails, she snapped, and I got locked out of half the financial dashboards. Did you? I said mildly. You had no right. I have every right, I replied. You just forgot. You're trying to humiliate me. No, I said. I'm trying to be accurate. Her voice dropped dangerous now. You think this makes you powerful? I considered that. No, I think it makes me visible. Silence. You don't want a war, she said finally. I looked out the window at the falling snow, at the clean white surface covering everything beneath it. I didn't start when I said, I'm just done surrendering. I ended the call before she could respond. That night alone in my house, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not joy, not relief. Momentum. They still believed this was about emotion, about jealousy, about a wounded wife lashing out. They had not yet realized they were standing inside a structure I understood far better than they ever had. And the higher they climbed, the harder the fall would be. Chapter 5 ended not with a confrontation, but with a shift. The balance had begun to tip, and for the first time in my life it was tipping toward me. The backlash arrived disguised as concern. By midweek, my phone buzzed constantly, not with accusations, but with invitations. Coffee, lunch, a walk. People who had never asked how I was suddenly wanted to check in. I recognized the pattern immediately. When a family senses loss of control, it mobilizes messengers. I declined all of them. Instead, I focused on the work. The updated financials arrived late Tuesday night. I read them slowly, line by line, the way I had taught junior analysts years ago. Numbers do not lie, but they do reveal priorities. Excessive consulting fees routed through shell vendors. Travel expenses inflated and coded vaguely. Decisions made without proper approval, justified later with charm. Caroline had been sloppy. Not reckless exactly. Entitled. She assumed no one would ever look closely because no one ever had. Until now. Wednesday morning, Laura called. We need to talk about timing. I sat at the kitchen counter, coffee untouched. I'm listening. Your sister is vulnerable, she said. But she doesn't know how vulnerable. That's an advantage. I pictured Caroline pacing in some sunlit office phone pressed to her ear, voice sharp with irritation, still convinced this was a misunderstanding she could correct with pressure. What do you recommend? I asked. Controlled disclosure, Laura said. Selective, not public, yet. I nodded. I want her to feel it first. Laura paused. You're very calm. I've had a lot of practice being quiet, I replied. That afternoon, my father showed up at my door without calling. I opened it and stepped aside without speaking. He walked in like a man entering his own house, then hesitated, noticing the absence of Mark's shoes by the door. So it's true, he said. Yes. He sat heavily at this table. You're tearing the family apart. I took a seat across from him. No. I stopped holding it together by myself. He rubbed his temples. Your mother hasn't been sleeping. I waited. Caroline is distraught, he continued. She feels betrayed. I almost laughed. Almost. She slept with my husband, I said, in my house. That was a mistake, he said quickly. Emotions ran high. They always do when people think there are no consequences. He leaned forward. You're threatening the company. I'm protecting my interests. They're the same thing, he snapped. Not anymore, I replied. He stared at me for the long moment as if seeing me for the first time. Where did this come from? I considered telling him the truth, that it came from years of being minimized, from watching my sister rewarded for boldness while I was praised for endurance, from realizing endurance was never meant to end. But I didn't owe him that clarity. It was always here, I said. You just didn't need to notice. He stood abruptly. If you go through with this, there will be fallout. I met his gaze, I know. People will take sides. They already have, I said. They just haven't admitted it. He left without another word. That evening I received an email from Caroline. Not a call, not a text. An email formal and carefully worded. She wanted to meet. Neutral ground. No lawyers. I forwarded it to Laura. Her reply came quickly. Let her talk. Don't agree to anything. Take notes. We met at a quiet restaurant just outside the city, the kind of place where privacy is purchased through linen tablecloths and attentive silence. Caroline arrived first. She stood when she saw me, offering a tight smile. You look tired, she said. You look nervous, I replied. We sat. She did not order wine. That alone told me how serious she was. I never wanted this to turn ugly, she began. Then you should have stayed out of my marriage, I said. She winced. That's not fair. I leaned back. This is not a court of fairness. This is reality. She took a breath. You're overestimating your position. I smiled faintly. Am I? You've always preferred the background, she continued. You don't like conflict. This isn't you. People change, I said. Especially when they realize who benefits from them staying the same. Her eyes flashed. You're being vindictive. No, I replied. I'm being accurate. She lowered her voice. If you push this, it will get messy. I met her gaze. It already is. There was a long silence. Then quietly, what do you want? The question hung between us, heavy with implication. I want acknowledgement, I said, publicly, professionally. She frowned. You want credit. I want truth. That would undermine me. Yes, I said, it would. Her jaw tightened. You're enjoying this. I shook my head. I'm enduring it. She studied me, then really studied me, and something like uncertainty crept into her expression. You think you've won? She said. I stood placing my napkin on the table. No, I said. I think I've begun. I left without ordering. On the drive home, my hands finally shook. Not from fear, from the release of holding myself together for so long. At home, I found a package on the doorstep. No return address. Inside, an old photo album. My grandmother's handwriting on the cover. I opened it slowly. Inside were photographs I had never seen. My grandmother and me working together in her kitchen papers, spread out laughing, notes tucked between pages, margins filled with observations about people, about character, about truth. One note written in her careful script stopped me cold. When they underestimate you, let them. That is when you see who they really are. I closed the album and held it to my chest. For the first time since Christmas Eve, tears came. Not of loss, of recognition. They still thought this was about anger. They had no idea it was about inheritance of something far more dangerous. Self-respect, and I was no longer willing to give it back. By the end of the week, the story had begun to leak. Not the truth. Never the truth at first, just whispers. Carefully edited concern passed between people who like to feel informed without being involved. I heard about it through a former colleague who called under the pretense of catching up. "They're saying you're having a breakdown," she said gently. "That the stress finally got to you." I thanked her and hung up unsurprised. When women like me stop cooperating, the easiest explanation is instability. It absolves everyone else. The next leak came from my mother's church group. A friend forwarded a message meant to be private. Prayers requested for our family during this difficult time. No details, just enough to frame me as the disruption. I saved it. Documentation, Laura had said, mattered. Friday morning, Laura called again. "They're preparing to move." "Of course they are," I replied. "Your sister's attorney reached out to mine. They're proposing mediation." I smiled. Already. "They want to contain this." "They want to control it," I corrected. "Yes," Laura said, "and that means they're scared." That afternoon, I received a calendar invitation I had not been copied on intentionally. Caroline had scheduled a board update call for Monday morning. Normally, I would not have been invited. Silent partners rarely are. This time, my name appeared on the attendee list. That told me everything. They were going to acknowledge me just enough to neutralize me. A polite nod, a line item. Then back to business as usual. I forwarded the invitation to Laura. Her response came back with a single sentence. "Perfect. Let them open the door." The weekend passed slowly. I spent Saturday reorganizing the house not because it needed it, but because movement kept my mind clear. I packed away Mark's remaining things and stacked the boxes neatly in the garage. I did not throw anything out. I did not rage. I simply removed him. That night he showed up unannounced. I saw his car through the window before he rang the bell. I opened the door but did not invite him in. "I just want to talk," he said, voice low, cautious. "You've done a lot of talking," I replied. It didn't help. He glanced past me into the house. "You look different." "I am," he swallowed. "Carolyn says you're trying to destroy her." "I'm trying to survive," I said. "That's not fair," he said. "You're hurting a lot of people." I studied his face, the familiar angles that now felt like someone else's memory. "So did you." He flinched. "I never meant for this to turn into a war." "You don't get to decide when the consequences stop," I replied. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his wedding ring, holding it out toward me like an offering. "I made a mistake," he said, "but I still love you." I looked at the ring, then at him. "Love isn't what you feel," I said. "It's what you protect." He stood there a moment longer, then nodded slowly and walked away. I closed the door and locked it. On Sunday evening, I prepared for Monday. I reviewed the documents Laura had flagged. I organized my notes chronologically, highlighting patterns rather than incidents. I did not rehearse a speech. I did not need one. Facts speak differently when they are no longer buried. Monday morning arrived cold and bright. I logged into the board call 5 minutes early. Faces appeared one by one, framed by home offices and neutral backdrops. Richard nodded at me, surprise flickering across his face. Caroline joined last. She froze when she saw me. "Good morning," I said calmly. There was a brief awkward silence before my father cleared his throat. "Let's get started." The agenda moved quickly through routine updates until Caroline reached the expansion segment. She spoke confidently, smoothly, outlining projections I recognized immediately. They were mine. When she finished, there was polite approval. Then my father turned to me. "Evelyn," he said, voice measured, "did you have anything you wanted to add?" The moment had arrived exactly as Laura predicted. Controlled, contained, performative. "Yes," I said. I shared my screen. The first slide was simple. A timeline, dates, decisions, names. "I want to clarify my role," I said, "because there seems to be some confusion." Caroline stiffened. I walked them through it slowly. Not emotionally. Methodically. Each contribution linked to outcomes the board recognized and valued. Each approval traceable. Each omission deliberate. "This isn't about credit," I said. "It's about accountability." No one interrupted me. When I finished, the room was quiet. Finally, one of the independent board members spoke. "This is substantial." "Yes," I said. "It is." Caroline found her voice. "This is highly inappropriate." I looked at her. "What's inappropriate is excluding someone whose work built half of what you're presenting." My father shifted uncomfortably. "We can discuss this offline." "No," I said. "We should discuss it here." Silence again. The independent member nodded. "I agree." Caroline's face flushed. "You're ambushing us." I smiled faintly. "I'm documenting." The call ended shortly after, unresolved but irrevocably altered. When I logged off, my hands were steady. The phone rang almost immediately. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. Then my father. I answered that one. "You humiliated your sister," he said, anger barely contained. "I told the truth," I replied. "There will be consequences." "Yes," I said, "for all of us." I hung up and sat back, breathing deeply. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and relentless. They still believed this was about winning. They didn't understand yet. This was about reclamation. And once reclaimed, I had no intention of giving any of it back. The consequences arrived faster than I expected. By Tuesday morning, the board call had already done its work. Emails shifted in tone. Where there had once been breezy familiarity, there was now formality. Careful phrasing. People choosing words like they were stepping across thin ice. Visibility changes things, especially for women who were never meant to have it. Laura called just after 9. They're scrambling. That was the idea, I said. Your sister's attorney is requesting an emergency mediation, she continued. And your father wants a private meeting, just the two of you. I considered that. He wants to remind me who he thinks has authority. Yes, Laura said, which means he feels it slipping. I agreed to the meeting, not because I owed him anything, but because I wanted to see how far he was willing to go to preserve the illusion of control. We met at his office, the same one I had sat in countless times growing up, perched on a leather chair that always felt slightly too big. He had chosen the space deliberately. Territory matters to men like him. He did not offer me coffee. I raised you better than this, he began. I sat down without invitation. You raised me to be useful. His eyes narrowed. That's unfair. No, I said. That's accurate. He stood behind his desk, hands braced on the surface, posture rigid. You're destabilizing everything. Investors are asking questions. As they should, I replied. This isn't how family handles conflict. Family shouldn't create it, I said. He sighed, the sound heavy with frustration. What do you want? There it was again. As if this were a tantrum that could be soothed with concessions. I want formal recognition of my ownership, I said. In writing. I want my role clarified publicly. And I want Caroline removed from unilateral decision-making. He stiffened. That would cripple her. She's been operating unchecked, I replied. That's not leadership. That's entitlement. You're asking me to choose between my daughters, he said. I met his gaze. You already did, years ago. Silence stretched between us. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking time neither of us could get back. If you push this, he said finally, you risk losing your place entirely. I smiled faintly. You don't get to threaten me with exclusion anymore. He studied me, something like disbelief flickering across his face. You really think you can do this alone? No, I said. I think I can do it without your permission. I stood. Have your lawyer call mine. When I left, I felt lighter, not victorious, clear. That afternoon, Caroline broke her silence. She did not call. She showed up. I heard her car before I saw her tires crunching over snow, engine cutting sharply. She knocked once hard, then once more for emphasis. I opened the door and stepped outside, closing it behind me. What is wrong with you? She demanded, voice tight with rage. She was no longer trying to soften. I folded my arms. You should lower your voice. The neighbors can hear. She laughed sharply. Let them. You always liked an audience, I said. Her face twisted. You're enjoying this. I shook my head. I'm surviving it. You think you're some kind of hero now, she snapped. Exposing me, embarrassing me. You embarrassed yourself, I replied. I just stopped covering for you. She stepped closer, eyes blazing. You don't understand what you're doing. You're blowing up our family. Our family blew itself up, I said. I just refused to stand in the rubble quietly. She scoffed. You've always resented me. I considered that. No, I said. I resented how everyone pretended we were equals when we weren't. Her voice dropped, dangerous now. You think Mark chose you because you were special. I felt the sting of that, sharp and unexpected. She smiled when she saw it land. He chose you because you were safe, she continued. Predictable. I was excitement. I was passion. I looked at her steadily. And now your consequence. Her smile faltered. You think he'll come back to you? She said, trying again. After everything. I don't want him back, I replied. That's the difference. She stared at me, then really stared, as if trying to locate the version of me she had always understood, the one who swallowed hurt and called it peace. You're not better than me, she said finally. No, I agreed. I'm just done being smaller. She left without another word. That night, I slept deeply for the first time since Christmas Eve. The next morning, the email arrived. A formal notice from the board. An independent audit would be conducted. Oversight committees formed. Temporary restrictions placed on certain executive actions. Caroline had been contained. The fallout was immediate. She called Mark. He called me. I can't do this, he said, voice cracking. She's spiraling. Your parents blame me. I closed my eyes briefly. This is not my responsibility. You're tearing everything apart, he pleaded. No, I said. I'm letting it fall where it was always weak. He was silent. I'm filing for divorce, I added. A sharp intake of breath. You're sure? Yes. After we hung up, I sat alone at the kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the wood. I thought about the girl I had been, the woman who believed endurance was love. I had mistaken tolerance for virtue, silence for grace. By the end of the week, my mother stopped calling. My father sent a single text clipped and formal. Caroline disappeared from social media entirely. And in that absence, something else emerged. Peace. Not the fragile kind that depends on everyone else behaving, the solid kind that comes from alignment. They had underestimated me because I had let them. They had mistaken my quiet for weakness. And now with everything exposed and shifting, they were learning the cost of that mistake. The tables were turning, and I was no longer afraid of the noise they made on the way down. Silence can be louder than shouting when you know how to listen to it. The week after the audit was announced felt unreal, like living inside a house after an earthquake where everything looks intact until you notice the cracks running through the walls. I moved through my days deliberately answering emails when necessary, ignoring what wasn't. I stopped explaining myself. Explanations are invitations for negotiation, and I was done negotiating my worth. The first real shift came on Thursday morning. I was pouring coffee when Laura called her tone different this time. Lighter, focused. They found irregularities, she said. I leaned against the counter. Define irregularities. Not criminal, she clarified, but significant. Policy violations, conflicts of interest, undisclosed relationships with vendors. I closed my eyes briefly. Caroline. Yes. I did not feel triumph. What I felt was confirmation. The kind that settles something deep in your chest that has been aching for years. They'll ask her to step back, Laura continued. Temporarily, officially. But you and I both know what that means. I did. Temporary has a way of becoming permanent when trust is broken. What about my father, I asked. He's exposed, Laura said carefully, not directly, but through oversight failures. That would hurt him more than any accusation. My father did not fear wrongdoing. He feared loss of authority. By noon, my phone buzzed with a message from Richard. Can we talk? We met that afternoon in the same conference room, where I had waited quietly just weeks before. This time he arrived early. He offered coffee. Things are evolving, he said. So am I replied. He nodded, lips pressed together. The board wants stability. Then they should stop pretending imbalance is stable, I said. He smiled faintly. You're not wrong. We discussed logistics, titles, committees, oversight. The mechanics of power being redistributed carefully enough not to alarm investors. Your role will need to be formalized, he said. I agree. And visible. I met his eyes. That's the point. When I left the building, the sky was clear for the first time in days. The cold air felt sharp, cleansing. I walked instead of driving, letting my breath cloud in front of me. Halfway down the block, my phone rang. Caroline. I stopped walking. Against my better judgment, I answered. Are you happy now? She asked, voice hoarse. No, I said honestly, I'm calm. They're freezing me out, she said. No one will return my calls. I leaned against a lamppost, feeling the cold seep through my coat. That's what happens when people stop trusting you. You did this, she whispered. I closed my eyes. You did this. Silence stretched between us, heavy and unfamiliar. You could stop it, she said finally. You could tell them it was a misunderstanding. I won't lie for you anymore, I replied. She laughed bitterly. You always were good at playing the victim. That word again. Victim. As if enduring harm without retaliation was a strategy rather than a wound. I'm not a victim, I said. I'm a witness. She hung up. That night, Mark sent an email. Not a call, not a text. An email like a stranger. He wrote about regret, about loneliness, about how everything had spiraled beyond what he imagined. He asked if there was any chance of reconciliation. I read it once, then again. Then I deleted it. The next morning, I filed the divorce paperwork. The clerk did not look up when she took the documents. To her, this was routine. Another marriage ending quietly without spectacle. I appreciated that. Not every ending needs an audience. When I left the courthouse, my mother was waiting outside. She looked smaller than I remembered, wrapped too tightly in her coat, eyes tired. I didn't know where else to go, she said. I hesitated, then nodded toward a nearby bench. We sat the cold biting through the metal. This isn't how I wanted things to turn out, she said. I know, I replied. You've hurt your sister, she said softly. I looked at her. She hurt me. My mother's eyes filled. You could still fix this. I studied her face, searching for the woman who had once brushed my hair at night, who had told me I was strong. I found only fear. Fear of change. Fear of losing the narrative she had built her life around. I already fixed it, I said gently. I fixed myself. She shook her head. You've changed. Yes, I agreed. That was the point. She reached for my hand, then stopped as if unsure she still had the right. I don't recognize you, she said. I stood. You never did. I walked away before she could respond. That evening, I received confirmation from the board. Interim leadership changes effective immediately. My name listed clearly publicly. I stared at the email for a long moment. This was not victory, not yet. But it was momentum. They had built their lives on the assumption that I would always absorb discomfort quietly, that I would prioritize harmony over truth. They were learning slowly and painfully that harmony built on erasure collapses the moment the erased person stands up. And I was no longer sitting down. The reckoning was no longer theoretical. It had a name, and it was happening now. Power changes the temperature of a room. I noticed it the first time I walked back into the office as something other than a shadow. Conversations paused when I passed. Doors opened more quickly. People listened without interrupting. Respect, I realized, often arrives not as warmth but as caution. My title was interim, but my authority was not. I spent the morning in meetings not asserting myself, not overperforming, simply existing in the role I had always earned but never been given. The work felt familiar, grounding. Numbers made sense when people didn't. By noon, the news had traveled beyond the building. A reporter called, then another. I declined both. Control is not about being seen everywhere. It's about choosing where you appear. Laura approved. Let them speculate, she said. Mystery is a buffer. That afternoon, the call I had been bracing for finally came. My father. His voice was different now. Not angry, not commanding, tired. The board voted, he said. I know, I replied. They want me to step back, he continued. Advisory only. I waited. You didn't have to do this, he said quietly. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. I didn't do this to you. You could have protected us. I protected myself, I replied, for the first time. He sighed. Your mother is struggling. I'm sure she is. She doesn't understand how things got this far. I closed my eyes. Neither did I. For a long time. Silence settled between us, heavy but not hostile. I never meant to sideline you, he said finally. That doesn't matter, I replied. What matters is that you did. The call ended without resolution. Some conversations don't conclude. They simply stop being useful. Later that day, Caroline sent a message. Not a plea, not an apology. A threat. You're going to regret this, I promise. I stared at the screen, then forwarded it to Laura. Her response was immediate, documented. Do not engage. I didn't. Instead, I drove to my grandmother's old house. It had been empty since her death, sitting quietly on a tree-lined street most people forgot existed. My father had meant to sell it years ago, but never got around to it. Deferred decisions were his specialty. The key still fit. Dust coated the furniture, but the place felt warm, familiar. I walked through slowly, memories surfacing in fragments. The kitchen where she taught me how to read contracts before recipes. The living room where she watched people carefully before trusting them. In her bedroom, I found the old desk by the window. I opened the drawer. Inside was a sealed envelope with my name on it. My hands shook slightly as I opened it. Inside a letter, dated years ago. Evelyn, if you are reading this, then something has shifted. I always suspected it would. You were never meant to stay small, no matter how much they benefited from it. I have left provisions in my will that activate only under specific circumstances. If your family ever forces you to choose between peace and truth, choose truth. The rest will follow. I sat on the edge of the bed and cried then, not from sadness, from being seen. The next day, Laura confirmed what the letter implied. A trust had been structured quietly, conditional, designed to protect my interests if the family business ever became a site of coercion or exclusion. The assets were not massive, but they were strategic. Leverage layered beneath leverage. My phone rang. Mark. I almost ignored it. Almost. What I said. I heard about your father, he said. Yes. I didn't think it would go this far. You never do, I replied. He paused. Caroline is blaming you for everything. I laughed softly. Of course she is. She says you manipulated the situation. I smiled. That's projection. He sighed. I lost everything. No, I said. You gave it away. There was nothing left to say. I hung up and blocked his number. By the end of the week, the audit results were finalized. Caroline was formally removed from her executive role pending further review. My father announced his transition, publicly framed as a choice. I stood at the window of my grandmother's house watching snow melt into the ground, the world slowly revealing what had been hidden. This was the boulder at the top of the hill. The moment before gravity finished its work. They still believed I was acting out of spite. They had not yet understood the final piece. Revenge, when done right, does not destroy indiscriminately. It restores balance. And I was not finished yet. The collapse did not come all at once. It came in pieces, quiet and precise, the way well-built things fall apart when the wrong support is removed. By the following week, Caroline was no longer interim anything. She was suspended officially pending review, unofficially untouchable. People avoided her name in conversation the way you avoid speaking about illness before a diagnosis is confirmed. Silence. I had learned can be punitive. She left me a voicemail late one night. I did not listen to it right away. I let it sit unread, unheard, because control is sometimes about choosing when to absorb damage. When I finally pressed play, her voice sounded unfamiliar, thinner, strained. "You think you're righteous," she said, "but you're not. You're just angry, and one day you'll realize what you've destroyed." I deleted the message. That morning, Laura and I met to finalize what she called the last turn of the key. "This is where it stops being personal," she said, "and starts being permanent." She laid out the documents carefully, explaining each clause, even though I understood them already. The revised governance structure, the oversight provisions, the redistribution of authority that ensured no single person could ever operate the company the way Caroline had. "This protects you," Laura said, "but it also protects the company from the family." I signed without hesitation. By midday, the announcement was prepared, carefully worded, bloodless. No mention of betrayal or affairs or family dynamics, just policy transparency and accountability. The board approved it unanimously. That afternoon, I ran into my mother unexpectedly at the grocery store. She stood frozen by the produce section when she saw me, as if unsure which version of me she would encounter. I almost felt sorry for her. "Almost. You look well," she said cautiously. "I am," I replied. She glanced around, lowering her voice. "People are talking." "They always are," I said. "You didn't have to humiliate your sister like this," she whispered. I met her gaze. I didn't humiliate her. I stopped protecting her from the consequences of her choices. Her lips trembled. "She's devastated." "So was I," I replied, alone, in my kitchen, on Christmas Eve. My mother looked away. "I don't recognize this family anymore," she said. I nodded. "Neither do I." She hesitated. "Do you ever think about forgiveness?" "Yes," I said, "for myself." She did not respond. When I got home, an envelope waited in my mailbox, handwritten, my father's script. Inside was a letter, short, controlled, uncharacteristically honest. "I failed you. I don't know how to fix it. I hope one day you'll let me try." I folded it carefully and placed it in my desk drawer, not with resentment, with reality. Some apologies arrived too late to restore the past, but early enough to salvage the future. That night, Mark emailed again from a new address. I read it once. He wrote about loneliness, about how Caroline had cut him off the moment things became inconvenient, about regret that finally sounded real because it no longer expected reward. I did not reply. Closure does not require participation from both sides. The final confrontation came not with shouting, but with a request. Caroline asked to see me. Against Laura's advice, I agreed. We met in a small private room at a neutral office space. No family homes, no nostalgia, just chairs and a table in fluorescent light. She looked different, thinner, her confidence worn down into something raw. "I never thought you'd do this," she said. "I know," I replied. "You always needed us," she said bitterly. I tilted my head. "I needed safety. There's a difference." She laughed softly. "You think you've won?" I considered that. "No," I said. "I think I've stopped losing." She leaned forward. "You ruined everything." I met her eyes. "You ruined what depended on lies." Silence stretched between us, thick and final. "What do you want now?" she asked quietly. I stood. "Nothing from you." That was the moment it hit her. Not anger, not triumph. Irrelevance. She watched me leave without another word. As I stepped outside, the air felt lighter. Not because the world had changed, but because I no longer carried its weight alone. The divorce finalized quietly that week. No drama, no contest. Mark signed everything without argument. I moved fully into my grandmother's house, restoring it slowly, intentionally. I kept her desk by the window. Her notes, her reminders. One evening, as I sat reading through old files, my phone buzzed with a notification. The company's annual meeting had been scheduled, public, transparent. My name was listed first. I smiled. This was not revenge in the way stories usually sell it. There were no public meltdowns, no screaming confessions, no courtroom gasps. There was only alignment. And alignment, I had learned, is the most destabilizing force of all to those who built their power on imbalance. One chapter remained. Not for them, for me. The annual meeting was held on a gray morning that smelled like rain and wet pavement. I arrived early, not out of nerves but habit. Old instincts die hard. For years, I had been the one who came before everyone else checked the details fixed. What others missed then slipped quietly into the background once the room filled. This time I stayed. The room was large but restrained, long table, neutral art, windows that looked out over the city I had helped build a piece of, even if no one had said so out loud. Coffee steamed gently at the sideboard, voices filtered in one by one, low and professional. When I took my seat at the head of the table, the conversation softened, then stopped. No one questioned it. That was how I knew it was real. As the meeting began, I listened more than I spoke. I had learned long ago that people reveal more in what they assume you already know. The agenda moved forward smoothly. Financials, governance, strategy. When my turn came, I stood not to perform, but to conclude. I want to thank everyone for their patience during a period of necessary transition, I said. Transparency is not disruption, it's correction. Heads nodded, pens moved. We've learned that structures built on silence eventually fail, I continued. This company will not be one of them. When I sat back down, there was no applause, just something better. Respect. After the meeting, people approached me one by one. Not with flattery, with alignment, with questions that assumed my presence was permanent. Outside, the rain had started in earnest. I stood under the awning for a moment, watching it fall, feeling oddly calm. My phone buzzed. A message from my father. Congratulations! I hope you're proud. I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. I am at peace. That was the truth. I did not hear from Caroline again. I heard about her, of course, through distant connections. She moved cities, started consulting work, reinvented herself the way people do when they are forced to live without the audience they once relied on. I wished her no harm, but I did not miss her. My mother sent a card weeks later. No apology, just an update, the weather, a comment about the garden, an attempt at normalcy. I placed it in a drawer. Some relationships do not end with explosions. They end with quiet distance, and that is sometimes the healthiest conclusion. Mark stayed blocked. Occasionally, I thought of the life I had almost continued living, the dinners I would have hosted, the holidays I would have survived, the version of myself that would have kept shrinking to maintain the illusion of family unity. That woman felt distant now, not erased, released. In my grandmother's house, I rebuilt slowly, not just the rooms, but myself. I repainted the kitchen in a warm, honest color. I replaced what needed replacing and kept what carried meaning. I planted herbs by the window just like she had. One evening as I sat at her desk, the same one where I had first learned to read contracts instead of recipes, I opened the album again. On the last page, a note I had somehow missed. You don't owe loyalty to people who only value your obedience. I smiled. Revenge, I realized, is often misunderstood. It is not about destroying others. It is about refusing to destroy yourself to keep others comfortable. I did not get my husband back. I did not get my sister back. I did not get the family I thought I had. What I got was something far more durable. Agency. Dignity. A life where my voice no longer waited for permission. And if you're listening to this story wondering whether silence is the price of peace, let me tell you what it cost me. Years. Years I will never get back. But I will not lose another one pretending I am less than I am to make others feel more secure. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been excluded, minimized, or told to be grateful for less than you deserved, I want you to know this. You are not imagining it, and you are not powerless. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply standing up, telling the truth, and refusing to sit back down. If you found strength or clarity in this story, take a moment to like it, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories about justice, karma, and the quiet power of self-respect, because silence is not virtue, and reclaiming your life is not cruelty. It is survival.